Right. Good afternoon, everybody. It's just past noon, and a very warm welcome to Women at Imperial Week 2021. We were very rudely interrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent lockdown in March of last year. And as a result, this year, given that we're still under lockdown, all of the events have moved online. But we still have a packed program of events starting today and running all the way through to Friday. So please do make sure to check out the Equality website. I'll post the link into the Q&A in a moment. And sign up for all of the different events. We think there is something for everyone. And this morning, or right now, we have our Action on Gender Equality panel discussion, which is the first of 3 events that are happening today. This year's theme, which will be taken up by the panel, is Choose to Challenge. So as well, which is what we traditionally do, as celebrating the very many achievements of women at Imperial, this week is all about reminding ourselves of the remaining challenges which are still standing in the way of achieving true gender equality. Now, we all know this past year has been an extraordinarily difficult one for everybody, but we also know it has exacerbated inequalities of all kinds. And there's little doubt that it has been particularly tough on women, on whom the burden of family care still largely falls. And this reminds us very much of the need to recommit to the goal of gender equality and indeed the goal of equality in general. And that's what we'll be doing in this session. We are very fortunate to have gathered a number of senior leaders from across the college to reflect on the challenges of gender equality and to discuss what they can do in their roles to advance it. So I, for one, am very much looking forward to the discussion. So without further ado, I will hand you over to our chair for this panel, Kenny Kamara, who is the head of the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Centre. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Stephen, for that very comprehensive introduction. A warm welcome to everyone on this call today. As Stephen has said, we are hoping to have a very interactive discussion, which not only includes our panel members, but hopefully you on this call today. So once we get started, I think it will be really useful and really engaging if there are questions that you want to ask. If you can post them in the Q&A panel, we will do our best to answer all of the questions that basically start to come through. But the more that you like a particular question, the more popular it will become, and the higher up it will ascend or descend in terms of the way the chat is set up, so that we'll be able to see it. And then obviously I will ask those questions to panel, and then hopefully we can have a little bit of a back and forth. And again, I also encourage you as panelists to ask questions of each other, because I myself am very curious, because we come from all different aspects and different areas within the college, and at the moment, just as Stephen said, this is kind of a hot topic. Gender bias, what that's meant during the pandemic, what that means in terms of return to college, what that means in terms of remote working, homeschooling. I'm really curious to hear everybody's views. So again, post your questions, and lots of likes for the ones that you would really want me to ask our panel today. So without further ado, I'm just going to ask everyone to introduce themselves. And I'd just like to start off with Deborah. And what I'd like you to do is, if you can just, tell us a little bit about you, job title wise, how long you've been at the college, and just give us a little bit of a breakdown of why you chose to be part of this panel today.
Thank you. So good afternoon, and I'm delighted to be part of this panel discussion. My name is Deborah Ashby, and I am Director of the School of Public Health at Imperial, that you've heard lots of because we're doing all sorts of work on COVID. We really have been working apace the past year. My own background is as a mathematician and statistician, so my substantive job here, if you like, is, and the one I originally came to do, is Professor of Medical Statistics and Clinical Trials. I've been in the college for, I was quite surprised, actually 12 coming up 13 years now, which, although I've been at several universities, including the Royal Free, which is now part of University College, up in Liverpool, and then at Queen Mary, this is the longest I've been at any, so something must be going right. I probably should also mention that I have just finished 2 years as President of the Royal Statistical Society. In nearly 200 years, I was just the 4th woman, so that was very interesting, and I mention that because I may refer to it, but I'm slightly debomb happy now because I've just handed over to Sylvia Richardson. Why did I agree to do this? Well, the short answer is that Stephen Curry is very persuasive, cares very much about the importance, and to be honest, it's usually easier to say yes than no when he's got his mindset that you should be doing something. But to delve slightly deeper, the college in many ways is a much better place than when I came 12 or 13 years ago with regard to gender diversity. I could point to the fact that we've got a woman president. I could point to the fact that in the Faculty of Medicine, we have 8 heads of department, of which 4 are women and 4 are men. It's a balance. What's the problem? But I'm also well aware that the rest of the college doesn't always look like that, especially at the senior level. So there are far fewer proportionately heads of departments that are women. If we look at our vice provosts, we've got 1 of each, but there are 4 deans, they're all men. Nearly all the vice deans are women. I think Mary Ryan is an exception. There may be 1 or 2 others, but it's nearly all male. And particularly when I put my sort of statistical techie hat on, I get invited to all sorts of college committees, I think largely on the grounds that they need a woman on there who knows what a number is. And there are some on which I am still the only woman, which is quite surprising. So although it's very easy to be complacent in the Faculty of Medicine and think, gosh, we've got this sorted with 4 women heads of departments, actually it's very uneven and it's very volatile. So I think actually coming along and talking about these is really important.
Thank you.
Nice to be here.
And it's good to have you here. And if I could ask the same of you, Emma.
Hi everyone, it's such a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Emma Carrington. I'm a clinical, I'm not sure if I started already, but my name is Emma Carrington and I'm a clinical senior lecturer and colorectal surgeon at Imperial. I'm very new to the team. I only began at Imperial at the beginning of the year, so I've been here just for 2 months. But before that, I was a lecturer at University College Dublin, and before that, I was a postdoc and a surgical registrar in Northwest Thames and at Queen Mary. And I was a student at Imperial as well, so I have been here on and off for a very long time. As a colorectal surgeon, I believe really strongly in the unique value that women surgeons and women academics can bring to the team. We have different life perspectives. We have different commitments in and out of the workplace than do our male colleagues. And things are changing and it's wonderful, but there still are challenges, there still are gaps that need to be filled. And so events like this, networking and raising awareness of the challenges that we've passed and the challenges we've got ahead is really important. So I'm delighted to be part of this and I can't wait for the next hour's discussion.
I think it's going to be a lively one. So if I can move on to you, Mary, and again the same question.
Thanks, Canny. Yes, I'm delighted to be here too, and I volunteered to speak at this actually. It's not something that I normally do, but I really wanted to be part of it. My role is I'm Director of Development and Campaigns at the college with an advancement. And then within advancement, we raised philanthropic income from individuals, foundations, and companies to fund college priorities. And within that, I run a team of fundraisers, about 2,500. My reason for joining today and for volunteering to take part is because because I think it matters so much.
Yes.
I'd agree with everything that Deborah and Emma have mentioned. And, you know, over the course of my career, I've seen so many clever, good, capable women come into the workforce and often go out again, or not be promoted or get fed up, or all of these things that we all know about. And I really think it matters. And I think it matters because, well, obviously we're half of the population, but I think because, as Emma touched on, we bring a different perspective sometimes, and that perspective matters and provides balance. The other thing I would like to say is I also joined because when I was growing up, I didn't have any female positive role models around me. And I missed it. I'm not sure I would have articulated it maybe in that way, but I thought, well, okay, I'm in a senior position now, so I need to do my bit. I need to do something about it. And the third reason related to that is I have 2 9-year-old daughters. So I feel I need to do my bit for them as well. And I need to show them that sometimes, you know, you have to step in rather than step out. So that's why I'm here.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I'd echo that completely. Being the mother to a 17-year-old girl. So yeah, they never tell you that about parenting, the role modeling aspect of it. Thank you. And if we could just move on to you, Anthony. Same question.
Well, hello. So I'm Anthony. I've been at Imperial on and off on pretty much the whole time since 1989. I'm currently head of Department of Bioengineering. I've been head for 9 years. And so I've seen things from this perspective of a student and of a staff member. I joined staff in '96. And I guess why did I agree to this? Many reasons, really. I mean, one of them is that actually when I first came to Imperial, I was really aware of my privilege, white middle-class male. Of course, I've added middle age to that now. And over the years, I've actively sought, I believe, to work for others to have that same privilege. And gender equality is one of those areas of importance. But that's not all. It's not just important for those individuals. It's important for the institution. I mean, we suffer if we don't have gender equality. We suffer from the lack of this fantastic group of employees and colleagues who are not working here, who perhaps might work here, for example. Just to say a little bit about sort of my main actions in this area. I mean, part of that has come definitely through my leadership of a department. So our department has been through an Athena Swan Bronze and an Athena Swan Silver in my time as head of department. And that's been an interesting, bruising, actually, activity for me. And we might want to discuss that at some point. But also nationally, I'm the chair of the trustees for the Biomedical Engineering Association, which is our professional institution for my discipline. And as part of that, we're working actively in this area. I think I'll stop there.
I'm looking forward to hearing more about your journey through Athena Swan.
I could just go on and say I don't just have also 2 daughters, Mary, and Canny. One of them is 17 years old, but I was the 5th of 6 children, and my 4 older sisters definitely helped me to have a certain perspective.
Oh, some good role models there. Very much looking forward to hearing some more details on that. Okay, so what I thought we'd do just to kick off is I've just got a couple of questions because I'm nosy, I'm curious. We're here, and the one of the things that has really sort of like come into sharp relief is gender bias in the past year in all its guises. And so I just wanted to start with you, Mary, and I just really wanted to ask you, for you, what does gender bias look like in 2021?
Okay, well, I'll start off on this, and I'm sure others will have views as well. I'd start off by saying that, just to go back a little bit, when I first started working in, my first job was in 1989, and in those earlier years, it was different. You know, it was, I studied chemistry, I was one of only very few girls, I worked for IBM afterwards, I was one of very few women. In those sort of, whatever that is, 10 years, you know, then it was very overt. You know, it was, you know, literally being asked, have you got children? Are you going to have children? Are you going to be pregnant soon? Please, can you sit on the top table because you're young and pretty? You know, it was all of this. I mean, it was not subtle stuff. I don't know if those days are completely gone. I think they may have largely gone, I have to say. So I think now what that looks like, it's a lot more subtle, but that doesn't mean it's not as important or dangerous. And I think for a lot of us, and this is men and women, I would say, I think we've grown up with this sort of assumption that I don't know exactly where it starts and ends, but that men are more capable than women. And I don't know, I don't feel that. I don't feel like I ever do that. But when you look at some of the examples that are given, you do, you know, the fact that, for example, people will often talk about a woman in an interview who doesn't look like a leader. She doesn't sound like a leader, this sort of thing. You know, the fact that the statistics are on the website, but I just picked out a couple because I thought they'd be fun to have. How many more times do men interrupt women versus interrupting other men? 3 times more. Women tend to get things like, they can be called abrasive in appraisals in a way many more times than men do. And there's these things I've learned in the last few days are called microaggressions. Not something I've ever heard before. And so I think now what gender bias looks like in these days, I believe, is lots of these small things. And I think what we have to do, and this is absolutely women and men, because we have it too, it's not being done to us. You know, I think you do have to understand it, you have to get informed, you have to watch out for it. And I think that's both as individuals and as leaders, so that we can make sure this is taken account of.
Yes.
That's a start.
I mean, I'd just like to sort of throw that out to the panel. Any other views in terms of what Mary has said? Because again, I would agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Mary, you speak to my life. The number of times that people have assumed that I'm holding a different role than I hold is enormous. Still, I feel when I walk into an office, I have to justify my existence and my role because people assume that I take another one by virtue of the way that I look and the way that I conduct myself. And I hope that I conduct myself very professionally and I have with the respect of my peers, but that's something that I always feel I have to earn, and it's not something that's immediately given. And I think that that subtle barrier that women in our position feel all the time, that we have to earn something before it is presented on the table, is just a little bit tiring, isn't it? And it's acknowledgement of these cultural differences. I think that's so important. You talk about unconscious bias or microaggressions, but we just have to in these days become so much more aware that it's not just about organizational change, it's not just about structural change, it's not about the laws, but it's about changing our own opinions, our culture, the way that we interact with each other. That, you know, when you see a young woman, old woman, anyone who's a little bit different than that stereotype, you don't make the assumption that you know what they can do or how they behave, you know. And, you know, when we talk about challenging, you know, how we're going to challenge this now, the theme of this year, that's what we should be doing every day, challenging ourselves as well as challenging others and our opinions.
Absolutely. And Deborah, it looked like you
Yes.
wanted to say something.
Yes, I mean, partly to endorse what Mary said about the experience. I mean, when I was at school in the 70s, I knew I wanted to work and I thought I wanted children. For the life of me, I couldn't work out how it might be possible to combine those. Actually, I've been very lucky in being able to do both. I had my children in the 1980s, and I mean, fortunately, the group I worked with were very supportive, and the MRC turned out to be very flexible if only you thought to ask them. But there were, huge pressures. But what I would say now, and my daughter, interestingly, who's now my children now in their 30s, and she's just gone back to work after a year's maternity leave. And in many ways, things are much better, especially in the civil service where she works. But the pressures on people are phenomenal. I mean, I think the pressures on all younger people younger stage of their career, are much worse. And so that juggling with childcare is really difficult. But what I would also add into the mix, which makes me think 2021, that perhaps wasn't there quite so much sort of 20, 30 years ago, was that it's not just childcare. I mean, I took Friday off, first day of leave this year, but, looking after my younger grandson, which was absolutely wonderful. But, it's hard work. And although actually his grandfather's quite useful, it's women preferentially do that. I know far more women who are taking time off to help the child, because actually part of the next generation going back to work tends to rely on grandparent care. And then on top of that, I had a wonderful few years. My parent wasn't wonderful, my parents were dead, but I had a few years where I knew I had almost no responsibilities because my children were growing up and I didn't have elder care. But I've got my contemporaries, some of them juggling both grandparent care and looking after very often dementing elderly parents, and torn in all directions, perhaps stopping work before they plan to. And again, it's not that men don't do anything, but it often is the women who are doing that or thinking or planning. So when I think what gender bias looks like, and that I would have said a year ago, this is all, as COVID has done for so many things, it's put it under the magnifying glass, it's made it starker. And I can only imagine what it's been like for those who've been trying to work whilst homeschooling. And again, men, and I'm looking at Anthony, I'm sure they're doing their stuff, but my goodness, the woman is the default, is the way I would put it.
Indeed.
I know very few men who are doing it on their own. I know plenty who are sharing, but my goodness, the buck stops with the woman. And the state of that I could quote as a statistician, and I think that's what we're grappling with, and trying to make it, to acknowledge that, to make it fair, because families matter, actually. I mean, I'm actually volunteering to sort of spend time with grandchildren, partly not to quite make up for the time I didn't spend with my own children, because maternity leave was much shorter then. I took 4 months for each child. Now it seems to be de rigueur. But trying to get the balance right is hard, but things evolve, and that's what we need to keep an eye on, of how are things changing.
Yeah, we do. And I'm hoping that, in terms of the discussion that we're having today, that, in terms of what the college is doing in response to all of this, whether it's overall or whether it's at a departmental level, I hope that's going to come through. I'm just keeping an eye on the Q&A, and we are getting some fabulous questions coming through. I wasn't anticipating so many so quickly, but I appreciate you. As an audience, I appreciate you, because this is gold. I just want to go slightly off piece. Is it all right if I ask some of these questions now? Because I think it's really pertinent to what we're talking about now. So I've got one here from Anonymous. It is reasonably well documented that women in academia get pigeonholed into certain roles, particularly teaching and pastoral work. Given that at Imperial, the proportion of women in teaching-focused jobs is twice the proportion of in the academic stream, I would say we have a real problem with structural bias. Do you agree? And if so, what should we do about it? The new pay structures for the teaching stream don't give us equality of pay. The cost of alignment would have been a tiny proportion of the teaching income. Now, I don't propose that you will have the answers to quite a specific question, but I just thought, let's introduce it.
Canny, I hate to, go on, Anthony, you go first.
You go.
No, it's terrible.
No.
Yeah, it's terrible. But you know, anonymous speaks to my soul. There, I cannot tell you how strongly I believe in this unconscious bias in roles that we have in academia. I mean, there is a wealth of literature that academic housekeeping, as they call it, is disproportionately ascribed to female leaders, mentoring of students, teaching of students, and that this is associated with disparities in promotion, disparities in pay, and an outdoor. I feel so strongly about this. I mean, we have to, at an organizational level and at a personal level, find out how we're going to change that. At an organizational level, we need to really ascribe value to these activities, because we all know that we want to take different roles in the team. How much of that is choice, female academics choosing that actually teaching is what they feel important in and they want to do, and supporting that, and how much of that is unconscious bias. We need to pick that apart, and we need to really realise that the role of an academic isn't only grant getting and grant funding, but it's teaching too. I couldn't agree more. I'm going to let Anthony take on before I start getting on my high horse so early in the conversation.
Over to you, Anthony.
I think this is a really difficult question because it puts a number of things together. So it brings together the teaching job family with the academic job family, and it talks about them in an equivalence, which is obviously fine, but they're not the same roles. And so I think we need to be careful to look at these separately. And so to pick up on Emma's point about effectively assigning roles, choosing roles, academic load, which is an important point and something we need to think about for academics in particular, is we absolutely need to have a transparent and clear way of assigning roles and of actually then deciding whether or not we're going to take them on as well. And so there has to be some discussion in that. And I think that it's something that different pockets of the university have been very good at and very transparent and clear about, but other pockets of the university have not. And so that's something that many people I know, and Jonathan Weber has chaired a group on this, and there's a lot of work going on at the moment to actually start looking at load and how we distribute roles. So the first thing is, I agree, I recognise that there is this imbalance, and it's a historical imbalance, and actually it persists. And I'll give a personal example that recently in our department management, we were looking through assigning roles for next year, and it's a big discussion for us and it takes a long time, and all the line managers in the department are part of this. And at one point, one of my colleagues said to me, have you just seen what has happened? We are discussing this role, this is a pastoral or teaching related role, whatever. And at the moment, it seems like there are only female member of staff who are being discussed as suitable for that. Thank goodness my colleague raised that. That colleague was very perceptive and was very confident, it seems, to raise that in this in the environment. So I think, to pick up on Emma's point, I think we all have to be vigilant for that, but we have to have good processes in place as well, and that's something we still need to work on.
And if I heard you correctly, you said that Professor Weber is heading up a committee to actually look at this. Is that across college or just for medicine?
It's across. No, I'm not in medicine, so I was part of it. So it was across the whole college, across all job families in the college. Yeah.
Okay,
And can I just ask, I'm interested in Mary and Deborah's experience, because I don't know about either of you, but when I was, moving into this role and speaking to different universities, I had more than one senior academic staff member say to me, oh, and do you know that you can become a full professor these days if you want to focus on teaching? You don't have to be, you don't have to do research and be an academic. And I remember thinking at that time that I have a CV equally suited for both, and I will make that choice. And I remember thinking, I wonder if a male colleague would have been asked that same question, an assumption that I would like to take on that role. I adore teaching, but I'm interested, Deborah or Mary, have you had the same experience? Oh, Deborah, you're on mute.
Oh. You've been muted again. You're back.
So the first thing I'd like to say, and I shall repeat it now I can be heard, is that I care passionately about teaching. I have taught actually on a paid basis since I was at school when I was asked to help a younger person. And from the School of Public Health, we are training the future leaders. And right now, yeah, we couldn't be doing anything more important. Yeah, I haven't had the same overt biases, and I suspect that may be partly coming from a maths and statistics background. It tends to be just rather more factual. If you can do it, you can do it, and if you can't, yeah, you can't. And in public health, I think the culture is a little bit different. For a start, we wouldn't be that overt. It would go down. I'm not saying it doesn't then happen that women pick up, and it's not even just the teaching. Often it's the pastoral, the softer side of that can happen. I mean, I think when I was in a maths department in one of my former universities, then there was much more of a sexism. And I remember watching some, I was on the UCAS, which is about university admissions. And I remember standing there with the group from the other departments I was working with, and two fellows watching the women walk upstairs, and I looked appalled. I mean, they never did it in my site after that, but I would never have gotten at the medical school. I had a joint appointment at the time. So there are some cultural things, but I mean, I'm going back 2 or 3 decades then. So I know I mean, I'm appalled, Emma, that you were having the kind of discussions today that I thought had gone out 20, 30 years ago. So this is absolutely fascinating. But I think back to the wider point. So Jonathan Weber, in case anyone who doesn't know, he's the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine. He is leading on workload planning because it's not something that in medicine we've traditionally done anything like as well for our academic activities. They have what they call workload planning for clinical activities. And I think it's really important because to have a fair way of discussion about who is going to take on the various roles, how they're balanced, and even, quite frankly, I'd love something which told me who was doing things in our large department. So I think that's it flushes things out, that then means you have the discussion. I mean, you wouldn't, Anthony, I don't think your department would have had that discussion if you hadn't been having a planning meeting and then someone said, actually, there's something a bit wrong here. So I'm hoping that will play a good role. But no, I'm still slightly shell shocked from Emma's description.
Oh, sorry, Mary, you're also on mute.
Oh, the mute button. I just wanted to add a slightly different point, because obviously I'm not teaching and I'm not an academic, but one version of this that we have, which I've noticed during my career, is for many years I've interviewed fundraisers coming in for new roles. And one of the things that I've noticed along the way, that no matter what I've tried, I've found it very hard to sort of weed out people who are very good talkers. They're terrifically charming and they talk well, and they've got these big profile projects. And this is where I think a bit of gender comes in here, because I think, I'm at the risk of getting into hot water here, but I think men tend to be much better at that as a group. Not all men, but I think more men than women. Women tend to underplay, men tend to overplay. And in interviews, I've tried all sorts of things. And I have to say, having made mistakes along the way as well, what I now do, which I never used to do, is I've introduced a written test for people at all levels. And it's a written test completely aligned to the job. So it's a task that they, do something in a timed fashion that, if they can do the job, is no problem at all. But what it does is it weeds out, I think, this bias that, quite frankly, I think is pretty hard to pick through. And it's just one small thing, but actually it has made a difference. And I've been surprised by some people who've been very sparkly in interviews. And actually then you say, well, how would you go about this, creating a strategic plan for this? And they couldn't do it.
And again, that's quite interesting in terms of, like you said, creating an environment where you see things through a different lens, more from the 360 as opposed to what an individual's actually just presenting. Again, I'm just thanking everybody who's on this call, because we're getting some amazing questions coming through. I'm gonna put my questions to one side, if that's all right with you, because I really think that some of these will, lead to some very interesting responses. So we've got one here, again from Anonymous. When we often talk about women, Black women are often erased from the conversation, or rightly or wrongly feel excluded from joining these conversations. What can we do as allies to make them feel a part of these kinds of movements?
I feel bad if I always jump in to be the first person to answer the question, so I'm going to give it to my colleagues first.
Yeah.
So
would anyone? Shall I pick someone? How about you, Deborah? Oh, you're muted again.
There. I'd be interested to hear your views, Kenny, on this. I mean, I think the first thing to say is that I'm a statistician, so the way I describe it is that diversity is not unidimensional. We are focusing today quite rightly on gender and sex because it is International Women's Day, and yeah, we should celebrate that. But there is, and that's the one I feel most comfortable talking about because it is my experience. With being president of the Royal Society, we got into discussions about Black Lives Matter. There are some people like Fisher, there's been fringes debate about, and I felt personally much more nervous about doing that, about saying anything, because it wasn't my lived experience, and actually having been brought up in Essex, it's actually very non-diverse in terms of gender in the 1900s, but actually I did say something and people seem to appreciate it. But personally, I'm a great believer in diversity of all sorts. I mean, if I've got a group or a committee, you want that diversity there. How we bring in people, I mean, one of the ways I try to put it is when I'm talking, and I've talked certainly not this last year, but the year before around the world. I remember being in Malaysia at the World Stats meeting, and we had all sorts of people at a debate on being a woman in statistics. And what I've said is, when I went in, there weren't people who looked like me. I mean, that was about gender. But if you see people who don't look like you, don't think I can't do that. Yeah. What for me happened to be about a woman going into a man's world, for others were going into other worlds. But I think the question is how we have that begins still is very sort of them and us. It's how we have discussions together, how we have discussions so that I know how to bring in everyone. And some characteristics are fairly overt. I mean, race and sex, you can look at someone and kind of make a superficial judgment at any rate, whereas there's other things I suspect are at play, and class might be one of them, that we can't. So I'd be interested in others. I've got no easy answers, but I think it's really important. I mean, not least because if we're not bringing in and including everyone, we're not drawing on the best. And I mean, Imperial College is about excellence, about anything. But if we're not bringing in absolutely everyone and making the best of everyone we've got in and those who could be joining us, then we're not going to be the best. So that's why I want to. But how is what's challenging me. So yeah. I'm going to pass over to the others.
Yeah, Anthony, you said
I don't think I'm going to give a full answer here, but I'd like to raise some other points here. And the first one is that we are not just a global player, and therefore we can have global impact through our behaviours. We are influenced by those who come to our institution. We have a huge influx of international students and students from all different places who come to our organisation every year. And they come from very different backgrounds, and their life experience will be different. And actually, we have a lot of work to do in terms of building our culture quickly. So we're building our culture for the long haul, but we also need to bring people into that culture. And quite a lot of work needs to be done on that. So that's just a point I wanted to raise, that I think actually this is not static and we're just moving forward nicely. No, because we have these huge numbers, we have this huge flow of people with different backgrounds and experiences. And the second point that I wanted to raise was, which is relevant to this specifically, is that we're focusing on tackling the equality of big groups like women or Black women, which are big groups, versus kind of tackling other inequalities, intersectional groups, people who are women from a low income background, let's say, or whatever. And we need to actually figure out what we're going to focus on in all these things, because it's hard work. We have to really do that. And sometimes we can't focus on everything because we are within this global situation and we're embedded in society. And so what are the things that we can focus on collectively as an organisation, and then personally as individuals? So I just want to raise those as key points that I think need to come out here, and it's sort of this intersectional point I think is key as well. Yes,
yeah. I mean, Deborah, you were saying sort of like, you know, what's my view on this? I mean, from my point of view, engage with Stephen Curry and the work that he's doing with the Race Equality Charter. There's some really interesting information that is very, very pertinent to Imperial that's coming out, and again, you know, if people really are sincere about wanting to open up the dialogue, engage with some of our staff networks. I mean, we have a hugely active staff network, which has, I think at the last, when I last looked at the figures, for example, Imperial as one, which is our Black ethnic minority staff network, over 400 members, and half of them are researchers. So, you know, and they are eager to engage in terms of finding ways to introduce allyship. There are some, you know, there's some practical things that we could do. Yeah, get involved, expand your networks.
Okay, I need to come and pick that up with you after today. But
absolutely.
But I think this also plays into the important concept of role modelling, actually, as well. And it's up to us as an institution to realise that many women, Black women as well, really respond to role models. And if they see someone in a position that they want to be in the future, they feel more encouraged, engaged, and able to perform that role. We know there's a lot of research which shows that women respond to role models more than men. Men look at a job title, think, I can do that, and they say apply for the job. Women look at a job title, then they see, oh, there's someone who's like me who's doing that job, I can do it too. And that has been shown in a number of professional fields. So it's about celebrating female academics, celebrating female Black academics, promoting them, spotlighting them, making them those role models that will encourage institutional change, encourage young postdocs, encourage students that, you know, someone like me has done it. I can do it too. You know, there was recently, you know, it's all about highlighting the achievements of Black women, achieving, you know, highlighting the achievements of, you know, those peers who we want to emulate. And I think the college has a real role in supporting that. And this is a great example of it, you know, and I hope that we can do more like this to, you know, people, to show people 5-10 years younger than us that, you know what, we managed to get through, you'll be there too, you know.
Absolutely.
I'd just like to add a point to that. I think because of this unconscious bias, whatever we do it has to be proactive. I think that's the point we're making, is it's not just going to somehow happen and right itself. It hasn't. I mean, clearly the evidence is there in most sectors, and you know, that's where you have organisations like the 30% Club to get women on boards. I mean, I forget the last statistic I saw on how many hundreds of years it was going to take to right itself. So it does have to be active. And one of the things I noticed, funnily enough, I noticed it on the International Women's Day website, was they very consciously, I felt, included nearly all young women. And I thought it was a funny thing. When we talk about women, we often tend to talk about young women. And I've got to the point in my life where I'm thinking, well, actually, I don't notice so many women like me around either now. When I get the tube and I get the train, I find that, you know, and of course I'm not the only underrepresented group at all, but I think it's about having the balance, because the balance brings the best result. We know that. And I think therefore people who aren't in the majority and aren't part of the sort of what feels like the standard group, even if that's not even true, I think you do have to do proactive work to change things.
I think that I hope that we'll move on to changing our views that there is no majority, because nobody fits in the same box as the person standing next to them. And I think it's this long ascribed view that there is one group who will do well that is actually what's stifling creativity in our community. And what we need to do is ascribe value to individuals' personal experience, personal strengths and personal lives, and to realise that what Anthony, as a white middle-class male, will bring is only part of your unique contribution to the world, Anthony. And you don't have to be limited by that, because you will have, you know, other features within your majority that give you value and make you different. And I think, as you said, Mary, the way that you interview your candidates, we have to realise that certain tools that we use have been used for years to highlight the skills of certain groups, and we have to think a little bit more creativity of what individuals bring to the workplace and change our tools so that we can, you know, recognise that values among others. You know.
Brilliant. I've got another question here. How strongly does the panel feel about women helping and supporting other women in the workplace? What are the ways other women can help the women they manage or their peers? Can this create an unconscious bias against male colleagues? So quite a few questions there.
I'll come in just with an example. So our junior academic staff, when they start, they are assigned a mentor. And this is someone who is really proactive. And I always offer a few individuals to be mentors. I ask them in advance, and the person coming in will be given the choice, and they might say, well, I don't want any of these. I'm looking for this sort of thing. And I then invite them to look around the college for potential mentors.
Yes.
I like them to have an additional mentor within the department, because actually it's helpful to know sort of how things work. And many of our female academic staff choose a female mentor on purpose, and that's supported. Of course, that loads the female, more senior academic staff more heavily, because there are more to mentor. And then I give them another mentor from within the department, who might be male or female. I think it's absolutely fantastic, because it gives you someone to talk to who can give you a perspective that you might feel is similar or equivalent to yours. But it's, as Emma was saying, there are loads of different experiences that you bring, and just your gender isn't the single one that defines you. And I think we just need to recognise that.
Yeah.
Was
that part of you? Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, against male colleagues. I'm just saying I don't think I can answer the one about unconscious bias against male colleagues. I haven't experienced that.
But before you mute yourself, I was just going to say I was interested to see that your department won a Julia Higgins Award.
Yeah, I mean, that was lovely. Why? I mean, for goodness sake. I mean, there are many things that we have been doing. I don't know if they're unique, but they are definitely particular to our situation. I think the first thing that we realised when I became head of department is we didn't really have a way of having positive action on inclusion and diversity.
Oh no!
It's a departmental culture committee. It was focusing on culture because we felt that was the means to achieve inclusion and then greater diversity. That then became our Athenason self-assessment team, and we kept it as a committee. So it's now become the Equality and Departmental Culture Committee. So that might be one reason. Another reason might be the way that we recruit staff. So, for example, we recognise through all the literature that people have told us about that CVs from certain underrepresented groups might look very different. And so we have to actually be very careful in the way we view them. And so what we have done for academic staff is we have targeted individuals who we believe would make good potential colleagues. And I, as head of department, whenever anyone has been nominated or been proposed, I have phoned them up and spoken to them personally, and taken them through the process, a process that they may be unfamiliar with, so that they can see themselves within that and put forward a good application, and encourage those who I believe would be able to make a good application to apply. And in fact, in almost all those cases, they are the ones who get shortlisted because actually they were the right people. They just perhaps might not have put in such a good application or won't even have applied. In fact, there are many who won't have even, who have now been appointed within our department. So, and in our recent hiring round, we had over 200 applicants. So you can imagine how many people I've had to phone up to solicit the right number of applicants and the right quality of applicants from that. So things like that, those are the kinds of things, but there are many other things that my colleagues have been doing. And my colleagues would talk about leadership setting the scene, but actually everybody changing their behaviours and working on this. And so the action is for everyone, but there has to be leadership.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. So, sorry, Emma, you look like you wanted to.
No, I just think the question was a really interesting one, and it's something that I have struggled with for a long time. I believe in a fair playing field myself. I don't want to think that I have had a benefit over anyone else or that I don't deserve to be where I am. So positive action is something I've thought about a lot in my career. And is it something that I agree with or disagree with? I'm interested in whoever posed that question's views as well. But I think we have to really be mindful that at the moment, the reason we're having this discussion is the playing field is not fair. And it is not, you can't just wait for that change to happen because we'll be waiting for 7 generations. So we have to, we are, I think, ethically bound to level that playing field faster and to actually realise that the reason why it's not level is because we each have a lens that is biased. And actually even coming to terms with that hard realisation that I am a biased individual and that I could have to be improved and I have to learn and grow. And therefore, you know, giving that active encouragement to my female colleagues, to give them that extra bit of attention to make them realise that those challenges that they see around them are not insurmountable is important. So I do, you know, as the only female colorectal surgeon in my academic colorectal surgeon in my department, I feel it's really important to, to encourage my female trainees into academia, to give them that extra time that they wouldn't have, because I know that they value it so much to see someone like them who actually, you know, has made it past that barrier. So yes, maybe I could give more encouragement to the male colleagues in my department. I get that I'm not being 100% fair potentially, but I think I think at the end of the day, we're still in a situation where that needs to happen. So I'm all for it.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Sorry, Deborah.
And if I can quote Dame Sally Davis, the previous chief medical officer, when she came along to something at Academy of Medical Sciences, aiming at women, and she said there's a special place in hell for women who will not help other women. And you know, she certainly helped me, she helped plenty of others. And as Emma says, at the moment that there is a need. And on the positive discrimination, I wouldn't want to see for most purposes, I wouldn't want to see a quota system at the final job, but all of the helping people to put in a better application, which is what Anthony was talking about, the mentorship, at senior level, you know, what can we do to increase the number of women who might be able to take on even more senior leadership positions to make sure that when they come to it, they should do that. The only time I would go for quotas is on things like committees. Then I think it's just wrong to have all male or all anything else. You want diversity. You want diversity in some symbolic leadership positions over time. Presidents of Royal Society, I've just chaired the President Nominating Committee for the next one. And you know, we make sure that over time, if we can do, we put forward a diversity of candidates. So there are some representational roles where you should do. But is it unfair on men? I mean, I'm sure some of them are feeling that at the moment they don't stand a look in, but numerically, I'm not sure they're doing so bad. I think we should always ask. I mean, I think it is always good to reflect and say, you know, is there something that needs to be going on? I am worried that there may almost be a flip in some areas where suddenly they become almost entirely female. I mean, medicine is now much more heavily female than male. And so what's going on there? And the curious question is why it doesn't play through to the senior levels. So I think it's a good question, but at the moment it's not my top priority, I have to say.
But, you know, Deborah, even within our Department of Medicine, 60% of our PhD students are female, 25% of our lecturers are female, and only something about 10% are senior lecturers. So although we are having 65% or something entry into medical school, we are still in 2021 seeing people drop off the academic scale. And you know, and if we don't champion female leadership now, you know, all those female medical students will have a career that they always want to have that potentially is lost. So we owe it to them to make change.
Indeed. And that feeds very nicely into a question that's been posted, and I was going to direct this one to you, Mary. Anonymous is asking, how do you work to support and champion women in your teams? Oh, and you just have to take yourself off mute if you.
In some ways, I'm probably in a different situation to everyone else actually on the call, because within advancement we are actually 80% women. So it's not something that's difficult to do. Actually, we have a lot of women at a senior level. Somebody even asked me, had we had the conversation the other way around, actually, in terms of more men. So yes, I haven't found that difficult, I have to say. I mean, yeah, I think it's probably best answered by somebody who's in an environment where there's a lot less women. I'll pass over to one of my colleagues on that, I think.
So maybe if we go over to you, Deborah.
Yes, so we've got I mean, in many ways, the School of Public Health feels much more balanced than many departments, but we've got something of that inverted triangle that Emma talked about. So our master's students and predominantly women. At the senior level, I'm the director, but actually the heads of our what we would call departments, most departments are called sections, are nearly all men, and having conversations to make, because in the next generation there's actually a lot of good people at chair level who could be taking those, so trying to make sure that we grow the next generation is important. So it's partly having those discussions. As an individual level, it's almost easier because, you know, I talk to lots of women, people ask me to be mentors, so individually I can do things, but trying to do it structurally is rather harder. The other thing I would point out, we're talking about the leaky pipeline. There are two reasons that. One is people and women often drop out because actually they don't want it and it's not for them. But the other reason women drop out, and we've lost some very good women in the School of Public Health, because they've gone on to very senior jobs. And actually at college level, I might say, vice provost level, the last two vice provosts for education have both gone off to be vice chancellors. Deborah Humphreys is down in Brighton, and Simone Bujovic is just now vice chancellor of Leeds. So that's a good reason for losing women. So I think for women who make it, actually, there are lots of opportunities, but structurally dealing with that and gearing. And I'm also, what's tied into that is we've almost got an age thing going on with no retirement. We've got a generation who've grown up in the medical school who've got senior together, and actually having headroom for anybody to take over is also a bit of an issue. So I think some of this is about rotation. My predecessor did the role that I'm doing for about 10 years. I would plan on doing it for some, I'm on a 5+3. My main job is to get us to White City. And once I've done that, I shall look to be moving on to something else, because otherwise you don't have rotation. So there's lots of structural things, but I think at the moment having those conversations is the best I can be doing.
Thank you.
If I just add another point, actually, the one thing I would say, which I think is not unique to women, but I've certainly had these conversations many more time with women, is about balancing their lives in terms of caring responsibilities, which often immediately seems to delve down into childcare, but actually, certainly at my point in life with the colleagues I have, is often more about caring for elderly parents, relatives, or even friends, in fact. So That is one real difference. And I would say I've had that conversation many more times with women. And one thing that I think helps, and I've done this myself, is as a member of staff, is trying to really drill down into what would really help you. Because in a way, what's difficult as a leader, if somebody comes to you saying, I'm struggling, you know, I'm balancing these impossible things, I just can't cover it all. And you think, yes, my goodness, it says, but what would make the real difference? And when my kids were very young, for example, working at home 1 day a week just made all the difference. Anything more actually sort of interfered too much with work. 1 day a week meant I could bring them to school, I could pick them up. It just really, it was a relatively small thing for college to agree to, but it made a huge difference in my life. And so I do think that's a conversation that I've certainly had with many more female employees.
And it's interesting because, again, someone's just has posted in the Q&A, and again it's linked to the current reaction to the pandemic. In the discussion about impact of COVID on working patterns, is it better to frame it about impact on parents rather than focus on mothers? The data would suggest child age is a big factor, is a bigger factor than the gender of the parent. So, should strategies be put in place to support parents regardless of gender? I see some smiles.
Absolutely. I don't have children myself, and so I can't comment on the utter stress that people must have been under over the last year with children balancing childcare and COVID and different working environments and the fear of the changing world around them. I can't comment on that. But I'm a real believer that the only way we can achieve gender equality when it comes to parenting is to make the conversation about parenting and not gender. To me, that is a complete, absolute 100% yes.
And I would absolutely agree that it's got to be about parenting, and partly very practical reasons, because not all parents are women. In some cases, we have male couples with children, and they've got exactly the same issues as any other combination would have. So, why wouldn't you make it? At the moment, because insofar as women are picking up the bulk of the issues, they will benefit proportionately. It also makes it, if we provide things that are there for both parents, then it makes it okay for people to speak. I mean, I'm very interested in my department. It's very often the men who say, oh no, I can't make that 8 o'clock in the morning meeting because I'm taking the kids to school, or I've got to dial off a teleconference at 6 o'clock to do the supper. Women are as well. Men, I think it's very nice that men are speaking out overtly about it, but all of that sort of helps say, actually, it's all right to balance children and work. But no, absolutely, it should apply fairly to anybody who's taking parental responsibility. The question is how you then encourage everyone to fairly take advantage of it and to fairly do the work. But that,
and can I maybe, I'm interested in other people's points of view about this, particularly as a female academic with no children. That sometimes I feel as though my voice as a woman is not as important as other women because I don't have children. And that often these debates about being a woman in the workplace are often quite heavily weighted towards parenting, which I believe is really important. I think that, explicit advocacy of work-life balance is important. But I have issues in my life. I want work-life balance too. I really do. And if that work-life balance means me, as you say, caring for my parents, or me choosing to take on another role in my life, we should be advocating for that as well. And I you know, I don't know if anyone else, I have these conversations quite commonly with female colleagues who have no children, that we feel somewhat sidelined in this discussion, because it's, when we talk about women in whatever, it's always like, oh, well, parenting, that's really important, so we should be given time off for that. I would like to explore my options too, and I wonder what other people think. Might be a really unpopular comment, but I'd be really interested.
No, it's of its time. I mean,
well,
yeah.
Well, I have a crack at that one. I mean, I feel I can speak to that because I had my kids very late in life. So I've had a lot of working years being in your position, Emma, and now I'm in. I've joined the other group. I mean, in some ways, I don't feel like I've changed at all. But it is interesting that there's no doubt by having children, I gained membership to a club that it did change people's perception of me and things that I could say. So you're right, it's relatively easy for me to say, oh, I've got to leave now, I've got to collect the girls from school or daycare or whatever it was, in a way that somehow I didn't feel that I could do before when I didn't have children. I mean, there's no doubt. I think it does change things. And you're right, I don't feel quite so comfortable saying, I have to leave early because I have to take my mum to the hospital. That just doesn't quite seem to be as readily accepted. So I think it is a fair point. But the only thing I would say, I mean, of course, this is about parents and not mothers, but there was that report by McKinsey in the US last summer or last autumn, where they were saying that, you know, the impact of being at home and COVID and everything has fallen disproportionately on women, without a doubt, in the home. And at that point, they were saying that, you know, more than 1 in 4 women is looking to step back or step out of the workplace following all the stress of the last year, which would be catastrophic. You know, these are well-educated, well-trained, experienced professionals, and that just seems terrible. So I think there is a bit that is specific to women.
And I would say that there is a reason for a very specific focus on parents and women, especially with very young children, because that period of intense disruption comes just at a critical time in careers. And actually, I mean, I had my children in my 20s, so I'd not got that out of the way, but I then benefited, especially during my 40s, when I started getting a lot more international invitations and chances to sit in senior committees. My children were really quite self-sufficient, and I mean, I was someone who was very, very, you know, did far more than his fair share of the childcare. So, but I think there are very good reasons, because that's where, you know, it's the source of the leaky pipeline and so on. But I think we also have to have a conversation about what other people's things are. And sometimes we say, you know, we must have meetings during these hours because it suits young children. Now, that may not suit everyone else. And so, particularly with smaller groups, actually saying what's best for this particular group and having the conversation like that. So needs doing, because, as I say, it's older parents, it's I mean, actually, as people get older, sometimes they may need a break themselves, but yeah, but I think there is a very particular thing about young children that does need a very special focus, and that's not fair. But yeah, but we need to make sure we don't exclude other people, and in particular in all sorts of ways, that other people don't then feel they're picking up the pieces. You know, if some people are part-time for whatever reason, are other people picking up pieces? And part-time work is wonderful, and there's a lot there, but you just have to say, okay, so if that's what they're doing, what does it mean for others? How do we balance that? How do we make it okay?
I want to pick up on the point that Deborah made about effectively treating people as individuals and knowing their circumstances and giving them the freedom and the ability to talk about their circumstances and then make things work for them. And I think that's what local team leaders need to do. And they don't just do it once, they need to do this regularly, consistently, and stay on top of it, because circumstances change. And I think the past year has shown that to us all, that actually circumstances change so dramatically for people, and they're still changing and are in flux, that we need to stay on top of that. And also give people the ability to communicate those changing circumstances personally, one-on-one, and that they don't have to do it in a public forum. So I've had colleagues in other places, I won't mention anything by name, who have basically said, well, I spoke to my team or 30 or 20, and they all said this was going to work for them. And of course, it didn't work for about 5 of those individuals, and that's a disaster because you're losing those individuals in that workplace.
And specifically in bioengineering, what have you done anything in particular to try and mitigate against this?
Well, the last year has been particularly hard.
Indeed.
But I'll just say one thing that demonstrates really my fantastic colleagues. So one of my colleagues, quite junior, who doesn't have children and doesn't have any other caring responsibilities, as soon as things started kicking off and the pressures were rising for everybody else, he just came in and said, I don't have a significant role, a significant administrative role in the department. I have time. I can see my colleagues are struggling for these reasons. What can I take on now? That was just one example, but there were many others. And I think it was that that level of knowledge of what's going on with others that allowed someone to step in. And of course, that has now been supported, and it counts as part of the load. And you know, we support that. But yeah, that's just an example.
Thank you. And I'm just conscious that we've actually used up our time. We're pretty much 5 minutes away from having to close things. I have a few more questions here, but was there anything in particular anybody wanted to mention before I maybe just take one more question from the Q&A? Or are you happy for me to take a? Okay. There's just so many. There's so many really interesting things that people have said. So if I go through, again, Anonymous has actually put down, there are studies that demonstrate that women are held to higher ethical standards than men. Do you think this is true at Imperial? And maybe I'll go to Deborah. Well, yeah, maybe I'll go to Deborah.
Gosh, I wasn't aware of that research. I'm not aware of that, but it's like many things. I wouldn't be surprised if it were true. So I'd like to see some data. I mean, I'd like to know a little bit more about what's meant about held to higher ethical standards. I mean, I'd like to think, at least in the School of Public Health, that we all hold each other to very high ethical standards, because it goes with the territory as a statistician. Being, you know, your integrity is basically almost all you've got. So I would be appalled if I thought any group, men or anyone else, was allowed to get away with less ethical standards. But I'm, you know, choose to challenge, and that's a challenge that we perhaps ought to look at.
I think that there's no doubt that women do come under greater scrutiny, and that their role is unconsciously questioned more than male colleagues. That we have to base our assertions on evidence. We have, you know, when we will make a proposal, I see that unconscious bias a lot. I'm new to Imperial, so I have no idea whether that happens here specifically, but it is something which appears, in my opinion, to be endemic through the academic and wider world. And so I would be surprised if it didn't exist. But it is certainly something that we need to tackle. We need to give equal voice and equal value to all our members of our academic team. And, you know, as we've said a number of times before, try to remove that unconscious, you know, lens that we're all wearing to say, are we sure that she knows what she's talking about? And you know, I think it's a really interesting point. And
it's you know, you've got to be careful what you wish for, because in terms of the questions that are just coming through, they're just amazing. And I think what we're going to have to do because of the time constraints is we may have to think about another way of perhaps answering some of these questions offline. But the themes that are coming through in terms of parenting, care, what we, you know, the college's responses as far as pregnancy is concerned, and how we support individuals, you know, during their maternity time. There's just so many things that we could have touched on today. The whole theme around just the specific things that are being done by specific departments and faculties as far as ensuring that this stays on the agenda, that this stays front and centre as far as we were saying, breaking down some of these barriers and mitigating against exclusivity. This has been a wonderful start, I think, to Women at Imperial Week, and I just want to take the time to thank everybody who's been on this call today, and just to apologise. I'm so sorry that I couldn't get to all of these amazing questions that have been asked, but I will try and figure out a way with the panel to see whether we might be able to do some sort of response and then post it. I'd like to thank you all individually for your engagement today, and to also thank Stephen Curry for introducing. But honestly, Mary, Anthony, Deborah, Emma, I think we could have talked for hours. I think we could have literally spoken for hours on this particular subject. Again, please, I'd like to urge you to get involved and to sign up to some of the other events that we have for this week. There are still places, there's lots of room for further discussion and engagement. And with that, I'd just like to say goodbye to everybody, and thank you all once again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Invitation, Canny. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.